My Family by Josh Siegel. This here is my family tree. Those highlighted are going to be discussed. It goes back to my great-great-grandparents, Jacob and Ida Watnick. Ruth and Herman Schur are my great-grandparents. Louis and Judith Siegel are my grandparents, and Nathan and Gila Siegel are my parents. It has been a long process for my family, going from Gorodets, Russia to Potomac, Maryland. Throughout my family's first century in America, our observance did not change in great detail. Rather than living in large Jewish communities, our family followed the path of many American Jews at the time by moving to the suburbs. This led them to a small Jewish community in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Being raised in this type of community paved the way for my family joining a Reconstructionist synagogue. Jacob Watnick was born in Gorodets, Russia in the mid-1870s. It was a small shtetl and was a typical kahila. He was Orthodox growing up and kept strictly kosher and observed all the holidays. He was an only child, so he was able to avoid the Tsar's army. However, when he was 16, his parents got pregnant. He knew he would have to leave. In 1892, he came to America. He went to the Poconos and became a peddler. As Jonathan Sarna said in his book American Judaism, peddling was a difficult and tiring occupation but required very little capital and promised substantial returns. Many of these immigrants were Jews. Sarna 68. While he was a peddler, his level of observance decreased. He did what he could to observe, but he couldn't the way he did in Russia. After 3 years, he sent money back for his family to move to America and moved to the Lower East Side of Manhattan. While living there, he met his future wife, Ida. They married near the turn of the century. They joined a conservative synagogue, kept an Orthodox level of observance. Jacob sold newspapers on the subway. In 1914, Ida gave birth to Ruth Watnick, my great-grandmother. Growing up, Ruth was very independent. Her father instilled in her a strong Jewish yet progressive identity. They kept an Orthodox observance but went to a conservative synagogue because in his travels as a peddler, Jacob had been inspired by the synagogues he visited. He liked the idea of men and women sitting together and believed that women should have a role in the service. As Sarna said, women not only made their presence felt within conservative synagogues, they experienced a heightened sense of religious status within them, particularly as a result of mixed seating. This is exactly what spoke to Jacob. He wanted women to have the same role as men in the service. This inspired my grandmother to go to the Jewish Theological Seminary, being one of the first women to graduate. Her experience at JTS drew her to the conservative movement. Unlike her father, she fully embraced the observance as well as the style of the conservative movement. When she married Herman Schur, they moved to Brooklyn and joined a conservative synagogue. The conservative movement spoke to them because as first-generation Americans, they did not have a life from Europe to hold on to. My grandmother's time at JTS made her gravitate away from the observance she had grown up with and more towards the conservative movement. When my grandmother Judith Siegel was born in 1941, she lived in a small apartment in Brooklyn with Ruth and Herman. In the coming years, her two sisters, Eloise and Joanna, and her brother David were born. This year was when just her and Joanna were alive. When Judith was 8, her family moved to Queens. They joined a newly founded conservative synagogue, one which more resembled the modern conservative movement. They observed Shabbat and the holidays, stayed home from shul during Yontiv. They also kept kosher and changed dishes during Passover. This was a step down in terms of observance from how Ruth had been raised. They did use electricity and they did drive in Shabbat, and did not follow the strict rules of observance that Ruth had followed growing up. Ruth's time at JTS had a profound impact on how she raised her children. She taught them to be just as independent as she was. My grandmother went to college when she was just 16 and married when she was 20. However, she did not follow the same path as her mother. Instead, she followed the trend of what many Jews were doing at the time and moved to the suburbs. She moved to Chapel Hill, North Carolina with her husband Louis so he could accept a position as a professor at Duke. When my father, Nathan Siegel, was born, they joined Beth El of Durham Synagogue and immediately immersed themselves in synagogue life. Soon after, Louis became president of the synagogue and Judith joined the sisterhood. Beth El was rather small, as the Jewish community in the Durham Chapel Hill area was rather small at the time. My father's family had a similar observance as Judith growing up. They were conservative, kept kosher, attended services, and stayed home from school, where my dad and his siblings went to public school, on the holidays. My father had his bar mitzvah at Bethel, and that was where he went to services for his entire childhood. While he was raised in a conservative household, living in such a small Jewish community did not bind my father to any one ideology. It allowed him to explore with different branches of Judaism to help form his own personal Jewish identity outside of the community. He experimented with Orthodoxy for a period in high school, but did not feel very comfortable with all the restrictions Orthodoxy placed on his life. Ultimately, he left high school without a clear idea of what his observance would like growing up. However, he knew he had a strong Jewish identity and that Judaism would be very important to him. Something else that had a major impact on my father growing up was camp and Jewish youth groups. He went to Young Judea, which instilled a strong sense of Zionism in my father. He also went on year course upon graduating high school, and this experience truly opened him up to all ideas of Judaism as he went throughout Israel and met many different people. It strengthened his love for Israel, which became a major part of his Jewish identity. When my dad graduated college, he decided to take his love for Israel into the professional sphere. He interned for APAC, building off the experiences he had during year course. However, this did not make my dad feel very fulfilled. Something which has always been an important value for my family has been progressivism. This is what caused my family to turn away from Orthodox Judaism and towards conservative Judaism, as they believe women had a significant role to play in the service. Furthermore, this is what might cause my grandmother to graduate from JTS. My father at first decided that he was going to spend his life fighting for liberal causes. He joined Joe Biden's presidential campaign in 1988 and worked as a speechwriter. This experience had a major effect on his own Jewish identity. By traveling throughout the country, he was able to meet all types of people. This helped cement his previous belief that Jews were not superior. He did not like the whole, as he called it, tribalistic idea, that Jews are the chosen one. During his time on the campaign, he went to many Chavurah minions. One which he particularly enjoyed was one with a Reconstructionist rabbi. This introduced him to Reconstructionism. When Nathan married my mother Gila in 1996, they searched for a synagogue to call home. They went to a number of synagogues over a period of 5 years, but never quite felt at home anywhere. After moving from New York to the D.C. area, my father remembered what the rabbi at the Chavurah Minyan had told him about Reconstructionism. He did more research and found out that they had come out in support of same-sex marriage. As Sarna said, the movement triumphantly voted to become the first in Judaism to declare homosexuality and heterosexuality normal expressions of human diversity. Setting aside biblical and rabbinical prescriptions against homosexuality, Reconstructionism embraced contemporary teaching and sanctioned the heterosexual and homosexual lifestyle equally as ways of being which offer fulfillment. Sarna 3:23. This spoke to my father. He loved the idea of a progressive branch of Judaism in a way that allowed people to observe in a way that they wish. This caused them to join the Adat Shalom Reconstructionist Synagogue in Bethesda, Maryland. Our family is probably the most observant at the shul. We are the only ones who keep a true conservative observance. We keep kosher, go to shul every day, and observe all of the holidays. However, we don't feel like we want to be binded by that. My parents have raised me in a way that lets me decide what mitzvot I want to keep. They've been doing this ever since I was born in 2002. One of Mordecai Kaplan's famous quotes that my mother always loves to repeat is that tradition gets a vote, not a veto. This is the model with which I have been raised. Despite me being raised in a similar household in terms of observance, this overarching idea has created some differences. Growing up, my dad's family watched sports on Shabbat as they turned lights on and used electricity. While we use electricity, we don't watch TV because my parents do not feel like that is in the spirit of Shabbat. However, as I have gotten older, they let me make decisions for myself on how I want to live. I now watch sports games on my phone or computer in my room, as long as it is not with my parents, because I do not feel like that hinders my Shabbat experience. This is a perfect example of the overall philosophy with which we grow up. Rather than being binded by a specific type of observance, as my dad was growing up, we now make decisions by ourselves. So while by and large we follow conservative observance, such as keeping kosher, going to shul on Shabbat and the holidays, there are some things which we stray different, some things which we are more observant for, like watching TV on Shabbat, and also some things which we are less observant for, such as how many days we do certain holidays. One Jewish value which my parents have particularly instilled onto me is a love for Israel. I have been to Israel 4 times and am going this summer for a fifth. I consider myself to be very Zionist and am a proud supporter of Israel. However, our support of Israel comes through the lens of the idea that we are not always superior or right. We criticize the Israeli government when appropriate and applaud them when appropriate. We call out others who unfairly demonize Israel. This all comes from the idea that Jews are not automatically superior, and this opened up our mind to the idea that Israel could be wrong at times. This is the effect that Reconstructionism has had on us. We look everything through an equal lens, not through the idea that we are better. We try to judge Israel as fairly as we can. This overall idea is one of the main reasons my parents decided to send me to a pluralistic Jewish school. They wanted me to get all perspectives about Judaism and to form a Jewish identity of my own. This was particularly important to my mother because she had gone to an Orthodox school growing up and felt like she had been binded. She wanted me to be able to explore all types of Judaism and to help form a Jewish identity for myself. Another major factor in shaping my Jewish identity has been my experiences at my camp, Camp JRF, unfortunately newly renamed Camp Havaya. It is a Reconstructionist camp which is affiliated with Hadat Shalom. It is there that I have had some of my greatest Jewish experiences, celebrating Shabbat and learning about Judaism with some of my best friends in the world. School and camp have helped me give an overall understanding of Judaism and a good understanding of all the different types of forms, the style of the service of all the forms, and the observance that comes with it. I honestly don't know what my observance will look like when I get older. I am fairly sure that I will not be Orthodox, because I don't want to have that many limitations on how I observe. I think I will follow the vote, not veto idea, but I don't know what type of synagogue I will join. I want to instill a strong Jewish presence in my children, but I don't want to force them to observe in any way, or feel binded or affiliated to a particular movement. There are really only 2 things which I can guarantee for certain about how I will connect to Judaism. I will continue to love and support Israel, as I always have, and I will watch sports on Shabbat.